Hello, my name's David Roth and a very warm welcome to the web seminar for the Brandzy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017. In today's broadcast, we're going to cover how the brands are valued, unveil the number one, uncover the fastest risers and new entrants as we count down the Brandzy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017. Exclusive interviews with Sir Martin Sorrell and Eric Salama, CEO and Chairman of Kantar. Explore what's happening in the brand categories and markets around the world. Take a look at the highlights from WPP's DNA of Tomorrow's marketing event in New York. And Brandzy's Top 100 Most Valuable Chinese Brands 2017 launch in Beijing. We'll take a deep dive into the Chinese and Latin American brand market. Learn about brands in Cuba. Discuss this year's hot brand building trends with Lindsay Patterson, Tamara Ingram and Kate Ward. Plus hear from some of the CMOs of brands around the world. You'll also be able to find out how to get more information, download the entire report and get access to our mobile apps and presentation charts. Plus, a lot more. So sit down, turn up the volume as you watch live the Brandzy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017 launch broadcast. Well, we've got an amazing amount to cover in a pretty short period of time for today's live web seminar for the launch of the Brandzy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2017. My name's David Roth from WPP and it's my pleasure to present today's programming. If you've got a question you want to ask to any of us in terms of the Brandzy experts, please just send me an email at david.roth@wpp.com or send me a tweet. You'll see down below the hashtag, so feel free to use that in all of your social communications around the launch of the Brandzy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2017. Well, to start the broadcast, I'm now joined by Elspeth Chang. Elspeth, you are the Global Valuations Director for Kantar Millward Brown. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Yeah.
We've got a lot to cover. It's quite an interesting 2017 in terms of analysis and data. But probably the best place to start, and we've already had a few early questions on this, was can we explain how we actually do valuations? So given that you're the person that does all the valuations for all of the Brandzy evaluation projects, you're the expert in this area. Tell us how you do it.
Yeah, sure, David. So for Brandzy, when people think about Brandzy, the first thing that will come to mind is usually the brand value ranking. But in fact, Brandzy is much more than that. Since 1998, we have been going out talking to consumers about the perceptions of brands. And now Brandzy, after all these years, is the largest brand equity platform in the world. So apart from that one single brand value number, Brandzy can actually tell you what is your brand, how did you get here, and what you should do next. And that's also what makes Brandzy more superior and differentiated from other competitors in the market.
So in taking that Brandzy data and fusing it with financial data,
right.
You arrive at brand valuation.
That's right.
Take us through that process.
Yeah, so in Brandzy, our valuation process is very straightforward. There are two main components to it. Number one, financial value. So in dollar terms, what is the actual value that a brand could bring to its owner? Secondly, is brand contribution. So it measures a brand's ability to, number one, charge premium and to increase sales volume. And this also generated from our Brandzy brand equity platform. And this is makes our ranking very different because we do not just tell you what is the worth of your brand, but actually what you should do with your brand and what's going on with your brand. So, and the two together will form what we call brand valued. And this is also how we rank our brands in the ranking.
So brand contribution is clearly an integral part of growing and sustaining brand value.
It is, I would say, is the most important part of our Brand Z valuation framework. So over the last 12 years, since we first launched our global ranking, we've been tracking the brand value performance of those brands which have a very strong brand equity or brand contribution, in other words. And what we see is those with high brand contribution deliver higher brand value growth. But more importantly, if we take a look at the brands with a lower brand contribution, meaning those brands with weaker brand equity, or the brand owners do not really care about the brands, actually there's a direct impact which is quite negative in terms of not just a brand value growth, but also business performance.
Now, I suppose where the rubber meets the road is, I suppose, the combination of our brand valuation and what's going on in the real world in terms of share price and the market's value of a brand.
Yeah. So
what do we see there?
So from the last 12 years, since we launched our first global ranking, we have been tracking the share price performance of our strong brands in the Brand Z portfolio. And what we see is if we invested $100 in the first year, the return is going to be $125, and that is 50% more than what S&P 500 could give to an average investor. So it shows that actually a strong brand could deliver exceptional shareholders' return to its owners. And it also shows that, more importantly, that brand building is not a cost, not an expense, but it is investment that will give you significant return.
So investing in a strong brand delivers superior shareholder value. Elspeth, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, Sir Martin Sorrell, CEO of WPP, is a very hard man to pin down. He's pretty much travelling to a different country every single day, but I managed to locate him here in London, and we had a wide-ranging discussion about things that are impacting brands, WPP, and the global economic climate. Let's hear what he had to say. Well, Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Gosh, grief. Time flies.
And time does fly, because this time last year, David Cameron was the Prime Minister of the UK.
Yeah.
The smart money was on Britain remaining in the EU, and that Hillary Clinton would be the Prime Minister.
Was it smart money or dumb money?
Well, clearly it would turn out to be dumb money.
It was dumb money,
so
dumb judgments.
What happened?
Well, the judgments were wrong, weren't they? We were sort of sitting in a bubble talking to one another, David, instead of probably doing our proper research. Maybe the samples were wrong. You know, the East Coast Liberals were talking to the East Coast Liberals, and the West Coast Liberals were talking to West Coast Liberals. And London was, well, it wasn't the Southeast, because the Southeast by and large voted for Brexit. But the intelligentsia, so-called, in the UK were talking to one another, and they clearly misread the mood, misread the sort of anti-globalization, if that's the right way of putting it, populist feeling that still exists, and it'd be interesting to see what happens in the UK election. Here we are on the cusp of the polls are tightening as we speak. I think somebody said to me it was down to six percentage points between Conservative and Labour. So Jeremy Corbyn might be Prime Minister.
Well, in the context of that then, how do you see the world's economic tectonic plates and the impact for business decision making? Because clearly things are changing.
World economic growth is slow. Inflation is low, although there's clearly inflation growing in the UK because of the weakness of the pound post-Brexit. When we might get more inflation if President Trump implements his tax plans in America. But by and large, there's very little inflation, very little pricing power as a result, and therefore clients are very focused on costs. So for the advertising and marketing services industry, I think it's totally wrong. The investment in branding is not as strong as it should be. And I should add investment in innovation and branding, because I think the key to long-term growth and successful long-term strategies is innovation and brand. And we know from the data that you do at Brand Z or Brand Z that we do at BAV and elsewhere, that investing in innovation and investing in branding accelerates total shareholder return and share prices, and that the strongest brands are the ones that do best against an S&P 500 or an MSCI.
Given the context of that, you know, one of the things clearly we do when we value brands is have a good look at the balance sheet. There's an inordinate amount of cash on most
relatively
companies'
unleveraged,
balance sheet.
Yeah.
Given that, why is there such shareholder activization at the moment?
Cheap money.
And what implications does that
Cheap money,
have to us?
No, cheap money. It's as simple as that, I think. Warren Buffett, I remember at the Microsoft conference, said, you know, he never thought in his life he would see in his lifetime ability to borrow 30-year money at such a low rate, and you know, you buy baked beans and tomato ketchup, and that grows or tends to grow year by year. So it's the cost of money is so low, and interest rates have remained lower longer than people projected, and I think a lot of people believe they'll stay lower longer than people think. I mean, they will rise, but they're not going to rise as much as people thought, and it's going to take a longer time for them to rise. I mean, we've seen with the Fed at the moment, there's some suggestion that some of the data they're seeing is not quite as enthusiasm-making for raising rates as before, and that people would be very worried about choking off continued growth. So I think the cheap money is driving. So there are three forces: technological disruption, activist investors, and zero-based budgeting, which is very focused on costs. Those are the three forces. The last two, activist and zero-based budgeting, I think are driven to a large extent by cheap money. And as long as that persists, you're going to continue to see the pressure. There's also, we've had a long cycle since 2009. We're seeing a lot of M&A activity, probably because people have run out of opportunities. They're seeing slow growth, and they run out of opportunities to cut costs, so they need another beast to get their teeth into.
Tomorrow is the WPP annual general shareholder meeting.
Yes.
Here in London.
Right.
When you address the meeting, what direction will you be saying WPP is going in, and also, you know, the direction of the marketing industry worldwide?
Well, four strategic objectives for us: horizontality, to get just as we brought Brand Z or Brand Z and BAV together. Horizontality, working together. Not against one another, but working together for the benefit of clients. That what clients want is the best integrated response to their needs, or their opportunities and their challenges. Secondly, the growing importance of digital, which is already 40% of our business, and we want it to be even more, and you won't be able to distinguish it in short order between analog and digital. Fast growth markets, 30% of our business. We want it to be about the same as digital.
And
40,
you're still
45.
bullish about fast growth markets?
Absolutely, because the next billion, it's very simple. The next billion consumers are not going to come from the US and Western Europe. And whatever is happening to multinational companies, and some interesting articles recently about whether multinational companies are as profitable as they used to be, whether they're growing as fast as they used to be. I mean, a lot of that's to do with currency, the strength of the dollar. But it's also to do with the fact that the BRICS and Next 11 slowed, although they, you know, when we look at the Next 11 in our case, we'd still see a significant growth and in fact a pickup. But of the BRICS, India is the only one which is continuing to rev along, and even that demonetization has checked a little bit of it. But the BRICS and Next 11 are going to supply that next billion consumers. So, my view, you need increased focus on that. And then the final point is data, which is 25% of our business, or quantitative disciplines, about half of our business, and that's right. So, more from WPP on that, and we'll be featuring particularly the horizontality part of that at the AGM. But generally, to stress this message that investment, you know, what people call capex rather than opex. I mean, there's tremendous pressure on operating expenditure and operating costs, and that has resulted in very little investment capex. In fact, if you plot investment as a portion of GDP, pretty much, you know, whichever of the mature countries you look at, whether you look at the US or the UK or France, Germany, Italy, Spain, it's been on a downward track since the 80s. I mean, it's recovered since the recession of a deep recession of 2009. But essentially, the animal spirits are dull. The S&P 500 is effectively shrinking because they're paying back more than 100% of their earnings to investors in the forms of dividends and buybacks. That's effectively saying we are abrogating responsibility for reinvestment of the profits we make into the business and giving it to the shareholders to decide what they do with it. I think that's wrong. And the irony of all that is that the companies that take the long-term view are the control companies, the ones that tend to offend the corporate governance wonks who, you know, one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, which we could all agree with, that's democracy. But on the other hand, if you're worried about being turfed out for having taken too much risk or make a mistake, I mean, for every 2 successes, you would hope you'd only have 1 failure. And you've got to take some risks.
If you look at the Brandzy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 12 years ago when you were responsible for starting the notion of doing this,
Yeah.
compared to today,
Yeah,
what
when
are
I was
your biggest
frustrated
observations?
that one of our competitors seemed to have a monopoly on brand. Now we have the superior technique by far. They just do some sort of panel of experts, maybe modified with a little bit of data. We have this very sophisticated measurement of not just brand metrics but financial metrics. And now I think we've established, or you've and your crew have established, Doreen and everybody else have established Brand Z or Brand Z as the market leader, but we have to make it even more famous.
We're putting together Brandzy and BAV together.
Yeah.
You might say, about time, too.
Yeah.
Taking longer than you wanted it to happen.
It is about time. Yeah. It's taken a long time, like pulling teeth.
What advantage do you think that's going to give both the group and, I suppose, more importantly, our clients?
Well, I mean, you know, if we look at the branding survey this year, which is what, our 12th, right?
12th year, yeah.
Yeah. The fearsome 5, as we call them, you know, top it. So we have Google and Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook are all topping the list.
Of course, most of those 12 years ago
Didn't exist.
and,
yeah. And the 5 that were at the top 12 years ago employed a lot more people, which raises all sorts of social issues going back to where we started. But putting BAV together with Brand Z or Brand Z, I think gives us even more clout in the brand valuation space, and also deals with what I think is the fundamental issue, is demonstrating clearly that what we do adds value, and the clients fail to invest in advertising and marketing at their peril. That if you're in the business of building, so going back to John Brown's definition of what, you know, he was talking about CSR, and he said, you know, if you're in the business of building long-term brands, you won't ignore all the stakeholders and communities you operate in. Well, I would say if you're in the business of building long-term brands, you won't reduce, diminish, cut to oblivion your investment in advertising and marketing, because that's the lifeblood. And once you see volume growth start to tail off, and there are many examples of where some clients are maybe getting a little bit of revenue growth because of pricing, a little bit, particularly in Latin America, for example. But when you see those volumes tail off, that's the danger signal. And that's when you have to reinvest. And maybe getting the balance between advertising and promotion is important. Instead of paying large amounts of money for slotting allowances and the like, what you should be doing is investing in the brand, not just in what we do, but, you know, adjunct or the origins of what we do in innovation. I mean, in FMCG, for example, which is under significant pressure for all sorts of reasons, the technological disruption, activist investors and ZBB, what you have to do is to innovate. Or you innovate or you die, and I think you innovate and you advertise or you die.
Innovate, advertise, or die.
Yes.
That's a great way to leave it. Martin Sorrell, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
You're watching the Brandzy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands live web seminar here from London. My name's David Ross, and if you've got a question, just ask it, sending me an email or tweet to the address here.
Now, a few months ago, we held a Brandsy seminar in New York, where we posed the question, what's the DNA of tomorrow's marketing going to be? And how is that going to impact brands? Let's take a look at some of the key themes that came out of that.
No consumer that we're trying to reach has to settle for average anymore. They can have the best price, the best quality product, the best customer service. So in order for us to engage them and to make them pay attention, we all have to deliver amazing.
Big data, big data, big data. As a marketer, every time I pick up the phone, I get sold something around data, which is important, but I have no idea what to do with that data. So that becomes a critical component from a serviceability standpoint, how we think about things. No one needs another dashboard. Only people need usable insights and usable data.
Finding the right problem is often more important than coming up with a great solution. And
so I think there is a tension between us wanting privacy, not to be talked to and spooked, and yet recognizing that the more personal and more relevant, the more likely we are to close a sale.
The common assumption is that young people hate advertising. 32% of them have an ad blocker installed on their mobile device. Well, they actually love advertising. They just smell bullshit from a mile away. And they want it to be authentic, they want it to be meaningful, and they want it to be purposeful.
There's this idea that intimacy and personalization is all about being stalked and being sold and being pushed things. But at the end of the day, there are consumers who actually want something. And there's many, many flavors of it.
This idea of loyalty, this idea of intimacy, this idea of service, that human connection isn't just content. It's how you relate them to the brand so that they want more. Imagine a world where we have more of the greatest luxury in the world, which is time, because of things like artificial intelligence, autonomous cars, etc., and what you would do at that time.
For your innovation teams, it's really understanding where we are, where your current audience is, and what is actually going to satiate them and delight them, and not just inundate them with kind of the bells and whistles.
Where we are very close to being is being able to take on a one-to-one level, when people inbound, take all the information that we have about them, predict what's going to be the most effective creative breakdown for them, the right promotion, the right tagline, the right image, serve it to them, learn dynamically on the fly, and re-update the engine, done at a scale of 1 million.
I think the future of advertising and ads is content that matters to people in environments that hopefully take away friction and exceed expectation. I think unlearning is probably the biggest next step. To me, you can't go wrong when you're sort of aligning yourself around meeting or exceeding the consumer's expectations, and there's business outcomes associated.
Well, we've already had a number of questions from people wanting to know how they can get their own copy of the report. And if you go to this URL, you'll be able to download the complete report. And I'll also be giving you a URL at the end of the program where you can download all the various different assets and videos and charts that you would have seen in today's broadcast. But don't do that now. There's plenty more here to come. And especially don't do it now, because we've talked about the top 100. Now is the time to reveal the Brandsy top 100 most valuable global brands for 2017. Wow, what an amazing list. There's some very interesting additions this year and changes. And to help us discuss that, I'm now joined by Doreen Wong. Doreen is the global head for Brands E for Kantar Millwall Brown and my partner in crime. Doreen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me, David.
An interesting year, as we've just seen from the unveiling of the results just now. What does that tell you?
Yeah, it's not an easy year, isn't it? Despite all these geopolitical uncertainties, 2017 has been a good year for brands. The total value of the top 100 has increased by 8%. Compared to last year, 3%, that's a healthy gain. So the total value of the top 100 is now equal to $3.6 trillion US dollars. This number
give us some context. What is that?
This number looks big. Actually, this number is very big. It's bigger than the GDP of Germany. So 100 brands' value is higher than the fourth largest economy in the world. That's very impressive, isn't it?
So we've looked at the list. We've seen the video. Let's take a look from the top, in a sense, from the top 10, the top 5. What do we see? What's interesting?
Right, you already know who is number one. Google has achieved a healthy value gain of 7% and retained to be the most valuable global brand.
And congratulations to Google.
Yeah, congratulations to Google, and followed by Apple, who has gained a modest 3% on value. And it's absolutely worth mentioning Microsoft, our number 3, which has gained 18% value growth in the past year, and mainly contributed by its healthy business in the cloud service. And Microsoft is also our top B2B brand. And this year, the rising star among the top 5 is Amazon. Amazon has gained a value 41% in the past year, and then jumping to the number 4. And Amazon is expediting from just an e-commerce brand and right now to an ecosystem platform brand, and from e-commerce and music, video, and Alexa, and wherever consumers are, Amazon are surrounding it.
I mean, it's quite an extraordinary year-on-year growth when you consider the compound year-on-year growth from Amazon over the course of the last few years.
Yes, yes. Amazon has achieved some fantastic results.
Well, we'll be doing valuations for the top 100 for 12 years.
Yeah.
It's interesting to take a look over that period to see sort of what changes have happened over that period. What do we see?
Yeah, one key finding is the strong brands are getting stronger. So when we look at today's top 10 is equal to $1.4 trillion US dollars. So today's top 10 is almost equal to the entire 100 brands value 12 years ago. And just compared to last year, 3 new brands have surpassed the $100 billion threshold. So now we have 9 brands, $100 billion US dollars or more. And among the top 10, 9 of the top 10 are from United States and 1 from Asia, from China, Tencent.
Looking at the top 10, when we started the brand valuations to today, it's interesting. It's a massive sort of passage of history that we can see in front of us in terms of which brands were in the top 10 then versus which brands are still there today.
Yeah. Do you want to travel the time machine with me?
I'd love to.
To 12 years ago.
Maybe I can get my hair back if we do that.
Yeah, and 2006, when we would probably drive in our Toyota and to Citibank, get some cash and shop in Walmart, and bought Coca-Cola and Marlboro and put them in our basket. Those are still very, very strong brands today. However, because of consumers' journey and the consumers' footprint have changed, and they are not in the top 10 anymore. And let's think of today's consumers' journey. They find something interesting on Google and buy with their iPhone and get Alexa and Amazon delivered to their front door. And today, because of the consumer's journey change, these platform brands are playing more and more important roles.
And we see that, I suppose, in terms of the growth of technology brands growing 16% this year.
Yes, and compared to non-technology is only 4%. And 4 out of our top 5 are AI-ready ecosystem brands, Google Assistant and CSI Series, Cortana, Alexa, and they are all surrounding around consumers.
And of course today
the newcomer.
we have the launch of the new Amazon product as well in the voice and AI market as well.
Yes.
We saw some interesting newcomers.
Yes.
Some of you might have missed them, exactly who they are. So let's take a little quick look, and we'll return to that a little bit later on.
Our 7 newcomers: Xfinity, YouTube, HPE, Salesforce, Netflix, Snapchat, and Spring. They have one thing in common: they are all from United States, and they are the new generation of Silicon Valley brands. And a lot of them have global mindset. They are much younger than many of the brands.
So United States is still generating innovation and is still generating strong brands that are growing very fast as well. Doreen, for the moment, thank you very much. You'll be back with us a little bit later. You're watching the live broadcast from the Brandsy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands Web Seminar. Now, during the course of the year, we speak to a number of chief marketing officers who are responsible for some of the biggest brands in the planet, and we discuss with them the implications for brand building in the future and their observations. So let's take a quick view and a quick snapshot of some of those conversations.
And today, if you look at most of the customer, they don't do one channel. They do multiple channels, okay? Sometimes they do online, sometimes they do offline. Some category they do online, some category they do offline. And those group of people, consumers, they are looking for quality product, quality service. This also gave the e-commerce, particularly like the JD.com, because we're committed to give consumer the superior shopping experience, a great opportunity to grow. So there is quite a lot of things we need to transform, and we are exactly in the right time to think about that and to set the direction. And then we do this transformation step by step. One thing I don't think that will change is our customer-centric philosophy. That one remains same, because we believe no matter how external change, so we can leverage those technology, but the fundamental, understand the customer needs, delight them, or even exceed their expectation. It's our fundamentals of the business.
10 years back versus today, the consumer is very, very different in terms of expectation of what products are going to do to them, are much, much better informed, questioning a lot more, and making far more informed choices. So they read the labels, they are very conscious about the health aspects of products they are taking. So what is it going to do to them? So they are clearly asking a lot more questions than they ever did. Consumers have a point of view. Consumers are talking a lot of, sharing a lot of things. They are very expressive today. So getting them early on in the stage of development, rather than you have the product ready and show, okay, do you like it and what do you say? But it's better to have consumers participate in our development process at an early stage, and co-creating the product with them makes a big difference in getting the innovations right. But the fact is, consumers' thirst for new products, new capability, new evolving needs is so high that you need to speed up your innovation, and you have to constantly look at what is that consumer's going to look next.
Today, we have to go back in different way to the days when retail was a one-on-one understanding of your customer base, kind of that local shop fitter that you knew very well on their first name basis. Yeah. It's data driven, but it is also basically driven by a forensic and detailed research and conversation with your customer. So it is not about the amount of data you're collecting, it's picking the right signal, and most importantly, doing something about it. 20 years ago, we probably had, 3 or 4 levers to pull. Today, you're basically in the cockpit of Concorde, traveling at Mach 2 because that's the speed of it, and you have an instrumentation and a dashboard, which is much more complex. And it is how we are all, as retailers and brand, deciding what lever to activate. So I don't think retailing is for the risk averse. I think you need to really fundamentally understand the dynamics that are playing, but it's a fascinating time to be in retail. There is a great demand for uniqueness, specialness.
And you can hear more from those business leaders and lots more on the URL that I'll give you at the end of the broadcast. Now, I'm now joined by Peter Walsh, who's the Global Strategy Director for Kantar Millward Brown, and has been closely involved in Brandsy since its very inception. Peter, thanks very much for joining us. We've seen some of the highlights, we've seen some of the themes already, but there is one very important theme that cuts through every single category and every single brand that does well in the top 100. What's that?
Yes, the key to financial success is being meaningfully different as a brand. To be perceived as meaningful, that is meeting people's needs in a loving way, and also to be different in a positive way, which is also allied with a perception of innovation. Combine those and you're in a really strong position. And the chart shows that the brands that were rated back 12 years ago in 2006 as the most meaningfully different, those same brands have grown significantly more, 4 to 5 times, than the brands which were rated less so.
And that's a situation in terms of those brands holding on to that position and making their brands even more meaningful over time.
It is indeed, because once you've got into consumers' heads in terms of being meaningfully different, it's hard to be supplanted. But actually, the barrier to entry is getting higher, because if you look at the top 10 over top 100 over time, they have on average been getting more meaningfully different as we've changed the composition of that top 100.
If you have a look at the composition now of the top 100, from when we started to where we are, we do see some seismic changes.
It is a massive, massive change, reflected obviously in the top 10 that Maureen was talking about just now. So what you see is that the technology-related brands, which were value about a third, are now over half the value of that top 100, reflecting the greater meaningful difference of these ecosystem brands to our lives nowadays.
And also, I suppose, reflecting just how pervasive technology is across all categories, not just the technology
Yes,
category.
indeed. It's the other brands that are using that technology are also benefiting from it, indeed.
Okay, if we take a look at some of the categories, let's start with apparel.
Apparel is a really interesting case. When we looked at the data, we saw there was a real difference between sportswear brands and other brands. And the distinguishing factor was the greater meaningful difference of those sportswear brands. So they account for greater value. But when you look at the diagnostics, which Brandsy is full of, behind those numbers, brand purpose, which is the perception of making people's lives better, is significantly held more by the sportswear brands, as is perception of innovation and also the ultimate brand experience. And we're talking about brands like Adidas, Topriser, Nike, Lululemon, Under Armour. These brands are adding value to consumers' lives through fashion and athleisure.
Cars, a sector close to my heart, having worked in the car market for many years.
Cars is very interesting because there is a common theme that happens to 3 categories that we're going to look at very briefly now. Cars being the first one. The luxury cars are taking a much bigger share of the top 10 because of their fundamental meaningful difference, in particularly the difference which is driving their premium. And so you see that they are, if you like, getting the credit of what is meaningful to those consumers rather than the mass market brands, which may be unfair, but that's the heritage of the delivery of those brands over time.
And personal care?
Personal care, again, we see this shift to brands that are perceived to be more luxurious being the ones that are taking a greater share of value within the top 10. So it's brands like L'Oreal, Lancôme, Clinique, for example. So they may not be so loved, but they've certainly got that added something which people are prepared to pay more for because of what the brand stands for.
Now, clearly, luxury is luxury, but we're seeing a sub-market within luxury of super luxury.
I think it's really interesting the way we see this split happening. So you've got the super luxury brands like Chanel, Hermes, Rolex, for example, which are very much their own things and delivering, signaling, if you like, that high price is high value and high quality. You've got Louis Vuitton, which has got, fits in both camp, the luxury and the ordinary luxury. But as a whole, those brands are doing very well, again, because they are so meaningfully different to consumers.
Well, Peter, for the moment, thanks very much. You'll be back a little bit later on. Now, one of the things that obviously we do in terms of valuations for using the Brands E-data, but it's just one of many things that uses Brands E-data. We have 3 new innovative products that are available to everybody across the WPP group that we have launched over the course of the last few weeks, and one which we'll be launching in 2 weeks' time. The first is SocialZ, which gives a snapshot of a brand's social performance, live feeds from all the various different social network sites. InnovationZ, which looks at how innovative a brand is, and we've already heard how important innovation is to driving brand value. And the third is WebZ, which we'll be launching in a few weeks' time, which will give you an understanding of how the brand is doing across the web. And to gain access to these tools and all of our other Brands E-tools, all you need to do is to go to Inside WPP. The URL is on the screen, and use your Inside WPP passwords to gain access. More about that at the end of the program. Now, we've seen a whole series of new entrants, Pete, haven't we? And we've seen some of the fast risers. We've discussed those, but let's take a look at this video to put them all together. Don't forget, if you've got any questions for us, please do either send an email or send a tweet, and we'll either answer them on air or afterwards. We've already had quite a few questions around the top risers, so it's a good opportunity to introduce Martin Guerrera, who is the Research Director for Cantar Millwall Brown, for Brandsea. Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining us live
No
here
problem. Hi, David.
on this web seminar. We've seen the top risers, we've seen the ones that are new. What's your observations?
Yeah, well, there's some interesting stories in the top risers this year. So the biggest riser we've had in percentage terms is Adidas, which has grown a massive 58% over the course of the last 12 months. And I think Adidas is a great example of a traditional brand that's really embraced the technological opportunities available to them to re-engage the consumer. So for instance, they have started using recycled plastics in some of their lines. They've made 3D printing available in some of their stores, which has really enhanced consumer experience and brought them that bit closer to the consumer. They've also really tactically focused much more on the US in the last 12 months. So traditionally, Adidas is known as a brand which is associated with football or soccer, if you prefer. In the States, Adidas have really focused on basketball. And they've also had some interesting tie-ins with Kanye West, Pharrell Williams to underline their fashion credentials. So really a perfect storm of technology, fashion and sport combined have resulted in some great gains.
Yeah, and we see, I suppose, their journey here on the screen in terms of how that value has been built over the course of the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So Peter already talked about the importance of meaningful difference. And again, Adidas is a great example of a brand which through a number of initiatives is becoming ever more meaningful to consumers and differentiated in the marketplace. And that's really driving their value.
And what about the mighty Amazon?
Yeah, the mighty Amazon. So Adidas may be the largest brand in percentage growth terms, but Amazon is the largest riser in dollar value. So growing a massive $40 billion in value in the last 12 months. So I think indicative of Amazon's stellar trajectory from a share price perspective, if the press are to be believed, Jeff Bezos is about to supplant Bill Gates as the world's richest man. And I think the growth of Amazon is due to their ferocious focus on innovation. So Jeff Bezos talks about it always being a day one mentality at Amazon. So that strive for innovation, we see that through Amazon Go, the bookstores they're opening, the bricks and mortar stores, through Alexa, through Echo, through Prime membership increasing, through their cloud services business growing and growing. So he talks about by the time they reach day two, that's when they'll be on the downtrend. So I think a lot of it is explained by their sheer commitment to innovation and some of the success that they've had.
Well, you can read more about the top risers in the report, which you can download. As I say, I'll give you the details of how to do that at the end of the programme. For the moment, Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank
now,
you.
Martin Sorrell spoke earlier about some of the geopolitical trends. And obviously that has a big impact on brands. And I sat down with Tamara Ingram, the global CEO of JWT via video conference to discuss just that. Well, I'm now joined by Tamara Ingram, who's the global CEO of J. Walter Thompson. Tam, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You join us at an interesting time. Yesterday, President Trump withdrew the US from the Paris Climate Agreement. We've seen various different brand owners, entrepreneurs, make a stand already on that. Tim Cook for Apple has already spoken out about it. Elon Musk from Tesla has withdrawn from certain committees that he was sitting on for the Trump administration. Is it now impossible for brands to escape the political climate?
I think brands need to be authentic to their purpose and to their benefit, and within the context, stay true to that. I do think there is a context, however, and I think people have an expectation with what is difficult in the world and what feels like some tough messages, whether it's Syria or whether it's politics, that brands are a ray of hope. Not unrealistic hope, but a ray of hope. So have a sense of purpose in life and are true and connected to their benefits.
Does this not place brands in a very difficult position, though?
It depends how brands behave. If brands take on a political stance, I think it does place them in a difficult position. But if brands are true to what they naturally offer, true to why they are around, true to their role, then I think brands can play a very important part of the world by, in a sense, bringing people together and giving people a sense of benefits by what they offer.
And what?
Can I give you an example?
Sure, please, yeah.
So there's a brand that Joe Walter Thompson look after called Elevate, which is in China, and it's to help women who are pregnant. And in today's world, a brand needs to, as I say, have a purpose, and a purpose that not only delivers a benefit, which is helping nutrition for people who are pregnant, but also a sense of utility. So an insight in China is that men are not allowed to go to a women's first scan. So what Elevate did is created a utility which meant that after a woman had her first scan, she was given a product that she could place on her husband's heart so he could feel the baby's first heartbeat. So what did that do? It was wonderful. It created a conversation in China, big conversation to want people to talk about why can't they be there and what it's like to participate. It elevated Elevate, the brand, and its role it had in women's pregnancy, and it gave a fantastic benefit and emotionally brought husband and wife together in a very moving time. So I think brands can play a very important role in a political environment, but they have to do it from their truth. Otherwise, there are authentic issues, and also I think it creates disbelief and cynicism.
And what role is there for us as marketeers and communicators to work with the clients in order to understand the parameters of what would be good for them in that context and what would be straying into difficult territory?
I think we have a hugely important role to understand the brand and the consumer need, and not to go away for authenticity. So if we think of a number of clients, there have been a lot of stories about that recently, when brands try to co-opt politics or go against what is naturally theirs, it causes a great deal of cynicism and actually rejection of the brand. So our role is always to be true to that brand and to make sure that purpose isn't so disconnected from actually what the brand's benefit offers, that again it creates a rise of cynicism. I think we're in a fantastic place to help when it's in a politically slightly dark environment, to help people feel optimistic and to deliver benefits.
One of the things that we're seeing more of across the world is countries looking inward as opposed to looking outward. One of the things that obviously brands do around the world is create large amounts of employment. Do you think that brands have underplayed their role in society in that respect?
I don't think people are interested in brands and how they've created employment. I do think they're interested in corporate brands, if I can separate the two, and how they've created employment. And I think we have absolutely underplayed that. I'm very proud of working with 4WPP and the amount of people we employ. I'm very proud of having a number of clients who employ over 100,000 people. These are jobs, mortgages, livelihoods, health, education, well-being, reading, getting people out of poverty. And I think we forget sometimes that that plays an enormous role in society. So I think when we look after corporate brands as opposed to product brands, I think it's hugely important to stress that.
We've just seen the Co-op in the UK launch a campaign where they talk about using only British beef, not just about the quality aspects of that, but also about how that creates employment and how that helps individual local towns and societies thrive. Do you think more and more brands and marketeers will be using local communities as the forefront of some of their marketing campaigns going forward?
It is very clear to me that intense localization is where the world is going. So we've got a paradox of, yes, very global, but true intensely local, and I think brands will pick up on that. In fact, indeed, I think you could get different benefits from products depend on the location. I think the more AI they'll have, the more we're able to get people in reality in real time, and then the more the local will become very important. So yes, I think that will happen, but I suspect the more that happens, there'll be a counter trend of connecting with global communities. But absolutely, I think localization is a key trend.
And finally, Tamara, it's just a few weeks' time until
Cannes starts, I suppose the Oscars for the advertising industry. What do you think the key themes this year are going to be in Cannes?
I think the key themes will be at two extremes. At one extreme, it'll be about AI, it'll be about technology, it'll be about utilization. And on the other hand, I think there will be an obscurity in a sense, because we'll see lots of awards and these very ingenious solutions. And then on the other hand, a sense of big storytelling really matter. And I think there'll be a discussion about how important is the big idea and big storytelling and gaining people's emotion versus actually technology and virtual reality and AI. And my view is there isn't an either or, but I think there'll be a fair bit of discussion around
Well, Tamara Ingram, the Global Chief Executive of J. Walter Thompson, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks very much, David. Great to be included.
You're watching the Brandsy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017 live web seminar from London, and I'm rejoined by Doreen. Doreen, very nice to see you again. Let's take a look at the top 100 across the various different regions. We'll take a gander across the world. What's the first observation?
Yeah, US brands continue to dominate the top 100. 71% of the total value is contributed by American brands. There is this 200% value gain in the past 12 years. Another massive growing country is China. Over the past decade, China's brand value has grown by almost 10 times, from just one brand and now to 13 brands in the top 100.
Well, we'll be talking about China specifically in a few moments. Let's take a quick look at the top 10s around the world.
Yes, the top 10s from each of the country and the region. US, the top 10's total value is $1.4 trillion US dollars. That's a huge number and is bigger than the country GDP of Canada. In China, the top 10 is 367 billion US dollars, and we have one brand, Tencent, has surpassed the $100 billion threshold.
The US, what do we see when we deep dive into the US?
Yeah, for the US, in addition to the tech fearsome five, we also have AT&T, Visa, IBM, McDonald's, and Verizon among the top 10. And most of these brands have gained a healthy brand value in the past year.
Looking at Latin America.
Latin America are all exciting. A lot of beers are in the ranking. Yes, Skol, Corona, Brahma, Aguila, and the top 10 beers, 4 are from Latin, and the value has grown from last year another 23%.
Looking at Asia, excluding China for the moment.
Yeah, Asia top 10 include Toyota, Samsung, NTT is the Japanese telco provider, HDFC is India's top most valuable brand, and it's a very strong national bank and with a very strong brand purpose, and develop itself into the innovation platform for many fintech startup companies.
And Europe, excluding the UK?
Europe is led by SAP, the leading technology brand that has a very successful transition from a legacy software brand and now to an integrated cloud service provider. In addition to SAP, we also see like Hermes has achieved a very strong growth over the past year. When the other luxury brands are cutting back, Hermes is leaning in and continue to invest in their strong product and production, which make the brands increase their value significantly.
And here in the UK?
Yes, our UK is led by Vodafone, but it's also worth mentioning HSBC and Shell. Shell is one of the big gainer over the past year, and the brand is very successful in terms of partnering with Toyota and developing all these fueling station and for hydrogen cars. So learning from all the top 10s in each of the country, we have found that the brands absolutely need to keep investing their brand building, and no matter it's good time or bad time, and in order for their brand value to keep growing.
Now, you can see a lot more of that analysis and read a lot more of that analysis in the full report, which you can download from the Brandsy website. But don't do that yet. Still got a lot more to come. Let's talk, Doreen, specifically about China. Impossible to ignore.
Yeah, China, as we talked before, is from one brand and growing to 13 brands in the past 12 years, and the total value has gained almost 10 times. And when we talk about China, we have to probably divide the brands into state-owned enterprise versus those private entrepreneurial brand. So we are seeing that the SOE overall has actually dropped their value compared to last year by 5%. But those non-SOE, those entrepreneurial brands, have gained their value tremendously by 15%.
And this, I suppose, is very much a reflection of the economic change that's also going on in China today.
Yes, it's absolutely moving away from the structured economy and right now to consumer-oriented and consumer-driven economy, and also shared economy is doing really, really well in a market like China. So when we look at the China top 10, we have talked about the famous Tencent and Alibaba, and in addition, it's absolutely worth highlighting Huawei. Huawei is the most globalizing Chinese brands and starting the brand already in 170 country markets. So everywhere you go, and you were able to see the Huawei advertising at the airport.
It's pretty impossible to go to any airport across the world.
You won't be able to avoid
without
Huawei.
first seeing Huawei as soon as you arrive.
Yes, these brands are gradually changing the global competitive landscape.
Well, Doreen, thank you very much indeed. It's always a pleasure having you here. Now, we have started doing brand rankings for countries, country brands, 7 years ago, which was our first one with China. And a few months ago, we launched the 2017 Top 100 Most Valuable Chinese Brands and held a workshop and event for more than 1,000 clients, opinion leaders and press. And as part of that event, we had a CEO panel of CEOs from global companies and from Chinese companies. Let's take a look at what they had to say.
It's a G2 world. If we look at our own industries and the incremental GDP growth for 2017, it's dominated by two countries, the US and China. And I think that will continue to be the case for a significant period of time. That gives the Chinese, in my view, a massive opportunity.
One of the biggest, I'll speak about China, one of the biggest strengths of China's attitude, the dedication, the believing in a better tomorrow, the going for it, the feeling, the self-responsibility to your own life. It's contagious. I must say, it's motivating to come over here and feel that.
When we look at the growth rate over the last 15 years of the dairy industry, it has passed already a stage there where you see like 20% growth each year. But however, if you look at the way the consumer changing, there are opportunities that the fresh dairy product, healthy product are getting a much higher growth, and we still can see a 15 to 20% growth. So the question to us is that, how are we able to change ourselves to meet the new let's say, the new normal.
You have small competitors coming up. In one day's time, they are seen and heard and connecting with the world. The world is going to see reverse innovation out of China, new trends. The consumer in China is faster moving than any consumer in the world. So all these new dimensions are challenging for a company like ours, yet at the same time are huge opportunities.
But our learning has been, if we do not want disruptions to take over us, then we should disrupt ourselves first. Some of the worrisome industries, such as healthcare, education for that matter, finance, they're getting a new lease of life because such entrepreneurial spirits of the founders or the leaders of the organizations are embracing technology.
We have seen many examples, very successful Chinese company, 10 years history, 15 years history, easily collapse, or, and so that's why I think today, when you look at brand, is really the single biggest asset.
China and the Chinese consumer has moved dramatically in the last 10, 15, 20 years in asking exactly and expecting exactly the same things that what we would consider as the more sophisticated, evolved consumers elsewhere.
I would say a increasing focus on quality over anything else. And that's not just quality in the way of the attributes of the product that you present and improve functionality, but it's also in the quality of how the company operates. Is a force for good for society, and I think is a way we can differentiate ourselves.
Well, I'm now here with Lindsay Patterson, who is the global CEO of Maxis. Lindsay, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We've seen the results of the Brands, the top 100 most valuable global brands. We've seen a number of brands increase their value over a consistent number of years. You believe that for brands to continue to grow their value, their relationship with the consumer, that brands really now need to take a stand. Why is that?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting trends around brand purpose. And I think last year was a tumultuous year. And I think the changes in the political systems, both in the US and in Europe, have meant that people are looking for more. They're searching behind walls. And they're looking for not only their leaders to take stands, but they're looking for their brands to try and do something, almost to fill the void of leadership that we now see in the world.
Is that not a very dangerous thing for a brand to do? I mean, we've seen brands take a stand on, on sustainability, which is, in a sense, good for everybody. And there's some big global leaders, businesses who've taken a stand on that.
I think it can be incredibly risky, and we're here in early May, and we just saw the disaster with Pepsi recently, where they tried to take a stand and did it in a very ill-judged way, because you can't be trite about a brand purpose. And I think in the past what companies have done is kind of got away with greenwashing. They've stated about a brand purpose, but meanwhile they've been relentlessly about making money. And I think today, when we look to consumers, and particularly millennials, that terribly overused word, but when we look at Gen Y, the younger end of millennials, actually doing good in the world and feeling like brands have a real purpose. And also, of course, because of the digital world, being able to look behind brands means you've got to try much harder than that. Yeah, I mean, I think consumers want to have a voice, and I think they know they're very powerful. So the days of talking or telling people what to think or what to go and choose are long gone. I think brands that are doing it better, and again, very recent example that you could compare to Pepsi with Heineken, who put consumers with opposing views into, I don't know if you've seen it.
I have, yes.
Yeah. Into a room a bit like this, but with very widely divergent views, and then asked them to do some tasks together to have a conversation, and then eventually revealed their differences, and then said, look, do you want to walk out, or do you want to have a chat over a beer? So actually there was a purpose to that, and actually it linked back to the product as well, and I think that was incredibly smart, and it really, really resonated.
Now, what would you advise clients who are and brands who are thinking about, what should their sort of purpose be, or what should their stand be? How do they go about creating and developing that in a way that it's fit with the brand?
Yeah, I mean, it's a terribly overused word, but it has to be authentic to the brand. You can't just do a poll and decide what kind of cause you're going to go after. I think it has to have a meaning to a brand. So when brands are incredibly powerful is when passion meets purpose. So that's what brands should really look for. And that's when you're successful, because you're doing it because you're passionate about it and there's a real drive. The media world today allows us to be much more precise in targeting our audience, because we have so much data at our fingertips. We can understand much more in a much more nuanced way versus, old-fashioned survey data, understanding how people truly think and believe. So I do think it changes it changes where we put that content. And crucially, it would be in environments where there's always a return path where people can have a conversation, because that's what the brand is trying to do. But I think, my passion and my purpose has been female equality. So we created a program last year called Walk the Talk. We've taken 280 of our most senior women around the world on a program to understand any of our own limiting beliefs, any kind of internal barriers we're putting up to success. Because when we look across our industry, whether it's media or advertising or any part of comms, we just don't have enough women in senior positions. And then broaden that out into the business world, and it's even worse. So that's my passion and has been our purpose. And I think it was really important that the CEO has to stand behind it. And to WPP's credit, Martin has now talked about gender equality being the most important cause that WPP, and we've signed up to the UN Common Ground Agenda for gender equality and to try and achieve gender equality by 2030.
And how important has it been for you to bring the organisation with you on that? Because it's pretty easy, I suppose, for the CEO, global CEO like you to say that's how it's going to be. But presumably...
I'd love to think I had that. It was that easy and I had that much control.
I'm sure you have that much control.
Yeah, it's influence, not control, isn't it? But you start with a business case, a better, diverse leadership creates better business decisions. People with diverse leaders on boards make better financial returns. So you can go back to the facts. And actually, really the crucial one in advertising on gender equality, you look at our consumers. We have to be reflective of the consumers that we are talking to. So that's both in the communications that we're doing. So how about men do the laundry sometimes, and women don't make all the decisions on makeup. They sometimes make car decisions, and they even take out bank accounts. I'm being trite, but women actually make the majority of consumer decisions. So if we are not
we're
talking
certainly
to
doing
them,
my household, that's for sure.
Yeah, if we're not talking to them in an empathetic way, then that doesn't make any sense for the business in which we're all involved. So I think it's a no-brainer.
Fantastic. Well, Lindsay, thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Well, each year, in terms of Brandsy fieldwork, we like to add a different country. Last year was Myanmar, and this year is Cuba. And here to talk about it is Martin, who was the project manager who managed the research in Cuba. Overall, Martin, what's your observation?
Yeah, it was a fascinating trip, and I think we learned a lot in the week we were there. One of the most surprising things for me was that consumers in Cuba were much more brand savvy than we perhaps expected. And there were several reasons for that. So one is they receive what they call the offline internet, El Paquete Semanal, which translates as the weekly package, and that's available for Cubans in the form of USB sticks or downloads to mobile phones, and it contains TV shows, movies, and obviously advertising, which communicates certain information about brands. But also what I hadn't appreciated was the amount of branded goods that are received by the community, by expats, mainly from the Miami area. So, much more brand savvy in terms of awareness, at least, than we would expect.
And strategically, this really was the very first study that's been done in Cuba looking at brands in Cuba.
Yeah.
It's a real trailblazing analysis. What do we see about the opportunities for first mover advantage for brands operating now in Cuba?
Yeah, we definitely see that with the political changes that have happened, obviously with Fidel Castro passing away, Raul Castro now being in charge, things are slowly starting to open up politically and economically. So from a brand perspective, it feels like there is a big first mover advantage. Some of the major corporations, Unilever and Nestle, already have a presence, but when we look at the data, we see in Brand Z parlance a big proportion of clean slate brands.
And clean slate brands are what?
So essentially means consumers are aware of them, but actually don't know much about what that particular brand actually has to offer. So we see a big prevalence of that type of brand, indicating that consumers may be aware, but actually there's a gap to fill in terms of knowledge of offer, for sure.
Social sort of network in the physical world, one of our key themes in the report, and I'll show you how you can download that in a second.
Yeah, I mean, there's a misperception which I shared, was that advertising is actually banned in Cuba, and that's not the case. It just has to be government approved and on message with a benefit to the broader population. So PR is a huge tool that brands need to be savvy in terms of how to use to start those connections with consumers once they've got that government relationship. So Google did a sponsorship of a big art exhibition in Havana in 2016, which was a big success. So it is possible to make that connection. PR is the way to go to begin with.
Now, we looked at specific sectors in our analysis. Interesting observation in terms of rebel brands.
Yeah, so from a cultural perspective, obviously there's lots in the report about the history of Cuba, which was a big education for myself. But when we looked at the brand landscape in the categories that we covered, so we covered spirits, beer, tobacco and coffee, even when we controlled for the categories versus the rest of the database, we found a much greater proportion of brands coming out as rebel brands and being endorsed as rebellious in the mind of the consumer. So twice as many
Fidel
as
will
you see
be
globally.
proud.
Yes, I'm sure he would be. But not only were they twice as prevalent, they were much better defined and clear from their rebellious nature. So I thought that was very interesting.
And rebel is one of the terminologies that we use for our Brand Z, Character Z study.
Yes, so it's all about brand personality, but definitely in line with perhaps how the rest of the world would see Cuba as a market. So very interesting.
And the key brands, the most powerful brands in the sectors that we looked at?
Yeah, so Havana Club was the one that stands out as being very famous on the global stage. So certainly the most powerful with the strongest equity of the categories that we surveyed. And I think there was evidence, though, that other brands are starting to play on the global stage as things start to open up. So Cristal within beer is a good example. But I think from what we saw in Cuba, there's a real entrepreneurial spirit amongst the population. So although those brands are currently the largest on the global stage, and there aren't many examples of Cuban brands that currently have that kind of profile globally, I'm sure in the future, given that spirit, there'll be many more to come.
Well, Martin, thank you very much indeed. You can get hold of your own copy of the Brand Z Cuba report. I'll give you the URL at the end of the programme. It's absolutely crammed, packed, full of insight, analysis, and some absolutely amazing photography by Cecile. So definitely something that you should download and read. Now, many of you might not have heard of Refinery 29 and the impact that what they do is having on brand building. Let's take a look at Refinery 29. Well, Kate, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Perhaps we could start off because many people watching today probably wouldn't have heard of Refinery 29, or if they have, don't really know it in great depth. So perhaps you can give us a little overview of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you so much. It's a real honour to be part of this programme. Refinery 29 is a media company for women. We talk to an audience of over 500 million women a month across all of our channels globally. We connect with women by telling stories that matter most to them. Everything from style, fashion and beauty content, all the way through to global news, politics, wellness, health, and really all of the subjects that interest them in between around their lifestyle, finance, fitness, interior decor. So we're really building a really rich ecosystem for young women of content everywhere from Snapchat, where we have a Discover channel, we're one of the original partners, all the way through to our owned and operated site, an email newsletter, and of course Facebook and other social channels.
Now, we're hearing a lot in the press and indeed even in the report for the Brandzy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for this year about millennial and the impact that millennials are having for brands, brand owners and marketing. At least 50% of millennials are women. Give us a feel for what are the issues that are impacting millennial women at the moment.
I think it's a really interesting term, the term millennial. I think at Refinery we see it more as a mindset. We see it as a set of characteristics that bind together a generation, but quite a broad generation. I think we see global connectedness as a real attribute of this audience. They're participating in an always-on global content culture. Beyonce announces her pregnancy with one Instagram post, and it's seen by millions in every country in the world. Films are released, albums are released, fashion lines are observed. So really they're participating in global culture and a global news cycle. At the same time, they're more globally conscious than ever. They're participating in wider narratives about politics, about sustainability. So really, it's a global generation. The second is that it's a generation that are really driven by purpose. We've seen this again and again in our studies with our audience, that this is a generation that are demanding more of the world in which they live. 85% of our audience say that they would switch to a brand that aligned better with their values. So this is a purpose-driven generation that are hoping to participate positively in the world in which they live and demanding the same from both the influencers but also from the brands that they're consuming and interacting with. I think,
but it's not a generation that doesn't like marketing, is it?
Absolutely
or
not.
being marketed to, or being communicated with.
Absolutely not. And I think that that's one of the kind of common misconceptions about this audience. They actually truly reward brands that positively interact with them. Refinery has excelled at connecting brands to our influential audience of women, particularly young women. We do that by creating compelling content with a specific tone of voice and a narrative in our environment. We don't see that women don't want to consume or interact with content that is funded by or integrates brands. The opposite of that is true. I think a really interesting example this year from the US, we created a program called the 67% Project. It was a program that spoke to how plus-size women were represented in the US. 67% of women in the US are above a size 14, yet they're only represented in 2% of media. We wanted to change that. We created a whole program that aimed to truly represent women. We did that in partnership with Lane Bryant and Aerie, putting them absolutely at the heart of that conversation. I think one of the most interesting things we did was partner with Getty. We created a whole new image archive of plus-size women, and we made that available free so that people could use those images. So there's now no excuse not to have representative images of women. Now, our audience absolutely loved that program. It generated 500 million press impressions and millions of social interactions.
So
that's a great example of where a brand leads a conversation that is relevant and impactful to this audience, and that's what they want to see.
And what are the lessons that brand owners today need to learn in order to be able to communicate successfully to millennial women?
I think the first is thinking back to those attributes. One is that sense of global connectedness. Two is rooting those communications, that content in purpose, and truly understanding. And I think the third is really about celebrating individuality. This is a generation who are very, very conscious of self-expression and wanting to be seen as individuals. They lead very layered and textured lives and have identities online that they've crafted as individuals. Programs that homogenize young women's experience, that don't represent them, won't succeed. And that's why at Refinery things like celebrating diversity, ensuring that you're using models that are representative so people can see themselves in the content. That's absolutely critical to making an impact with this generation.
Now, you just recently completed a very interesting study on millennial women. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, we recently did an interesting study on motherhood and the road to motherhood. Obviously, millennial women as an age bracket, let's call sort of 18 to 35, a lot of them are young mums thinking about having babies. Maybe they've had one and they're thinking about having another one. But I think what's interesting is that this isn't the straightforward path, perhaps, that it used to be. What we're seeing is that women are having a much more varied experience than ever before. It's not so much a career ladder, but a career roller coaster. They may move home with their parents in their 30s to save up to buy that flat. And it's not always the case that you get married and have a baby and that's the course that you take. Many women are choosing not to have children, focus on other things. The study really called upon that variety of experience and tried to unpack it, to try and really truly understand how women felt about the road to motherhood and how they were marketed to by brands and also by traditional media in that context.
I mean, given how many brands are out there and a number in this year's BrandZ Top 100 whose sort of core target audience is mums in one form or another, what would you say the three most important learnings for those brand owners would be coming out of the study?
I think absolutely the first is that women are really, really keen not to lose their sense of self as they enter motherhood. We saw that 93% still want to be able to pursue their passions and interests after they become a mother. It isn't the only thing that defines them. The second thing is that while social media in particular has been a great source of information and community for mums, offering them interesting perspectives on how to raise their children perhaps, or the road to motherhood, they also more than ever feel the pressure to be perfect, to present a picture of perfection. And we all know that life isn't really like that. And in fact, what we heard a lot was that there are some social media portrayals of motherhood where you only show the bad stuff, but again, you've artfully decorated as your baby has thrown their supper all over you, which certainly isn't the case in my house or many of my friends. So I think understanding that social pressure is important. I think the third thing, and I think this is really, really important, is again in representation. Are there lots of different types of parenthood that are being represented today? How do working mums feel when all of the marketing is about mums who are staying at home? How do mums who are staying at home feel if their particular style of parenting isn't represented as positive or impactful? So the biggest single lesson, I think, is we have to represent women better. We have to talk to them more as individuals. It's very, very hard to do with a mass media approach, but I think absolutely this core of individuality needs to be better represented in order to reach them.
I was very surprised in the study what a role model Claire Underwood was.
Yes.
Why?
Claire Underwood from House of Cards as sort of the number one pick of role models. Look, I think she's uncompromising. She sort of goes for what she wants. She's not afraid to break out of boxes, to challenge stereotypes, to challenge convention. Perhaps not the obvious role model, but I think that those attributes of challenging inherited wisdom, of being seen as uncompromisingly oneself, speak to this trait of individuality that we really need to be focused on.
Well, be interesting to see the new series. What is just starting. So it'll be interesting to see when I get to that binge watching what her character changes and develops in. Where can people get more information about Refinery 29 from?
Absolutely, really simple, refinery29.com. If you want to go to our website, you can check us out on Snapchat, our Discover channel, or on Facebook. You know, if you enjoy it, sign up. We have a daily email that brings all of our style and substance right there. So there's absolutely lots of ways to find us. And yeah, thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this.
Thank you very much indeed for being with us today.
Thank you.
Well, as difficult as it is to find Sir Martin Sorrell, it's also very difficult to catch up with Eric Salama, who's always dashing around the world in his role as CEO of Kantar. But I did manage to find him via a very dodgy Skype connection when he was in Stockholm, and we managed to find a little part in the room where the Wi-Fi connection was the greatest. Unfortunately, it does look like he's in a prison cell. I can assure you he wasn't. And I started by asking him, what was the value
I think the main thing is that
WPP
it takes the discussion about brands into the boardroom and into the CEO conversation.
And at a time when all of our clients are questioning how much they ought to invest in brand building, I think it's the single best thing that exists, not just within WPP, but across the industry, to actually make it a conversation about financial value, not just some interesting research metric.
And how important do you think it is now to have that conversation about financial returns in terms of brand investment as opposed to just image returns?
I think it's never been more important. We all have conversations with clients who question the amount of money they ought to spend, how they ought to spend their money. We have zero-based budgeting all over most of our clients. We need to have something like Brand-Z to really help us have a conversation which is about the value to those clients and the return on investment of investing in their brands. And it's, as I say, it's the single best tool that exists in the industry, bar none, to have that conversation.
Eric, you sit at Kantar, sort of the epicenter of understanding and really seeing consumer change. What change are you seeing across the Kantar companies in terms of what they're seeing consumers doing differently than they have done in the past? And what implications does that have for brand building in terms of growing value?
I guess everything's become a bit more blurred and a bit more integrated. So obviously within the marketing function, for quite a while now, we've seen clients approach things in a more integrated way and want to think about all forms of media, obviously driven by digital more than anything else these days, but TV, digital, everything. I think what's interesting now, and we've seen it in the way that clients like Unilever have reorganized, and it's always been there in the way that clients like Ford have organized, is that the trade and the shopper side and the channel side of it have also become equally important. And most of our clients spend more on the channel side and on the trade side than they do on the classic brand building consumer side. So I think more and more there's a conversation going on about how do we spend our money effectively, and that includes the channel as well as the consumer. It includes all of their customers as well as the end person.
So all roads seem to lead back to proving efficiency and cost effectiveness of spend and effort.
Yeah, I think that's right, and we're seeing great success with tools like Kantar Retail's Extel, which is a tool in trade promotion optimization. And a few years ago, that would have been something just for a few geeks within a client organization. That's now a board level decision as to who they partner with, and it's a decision which the IT director and the marketing director get together to have a conversation about. So in an era, as I say, in an era of zero-based budgeting, the most important thing that we can do is make the case to our clients of the importance of long-term and very optimized spending.
Looking into the future, Eric, artificial intelligence was pretty much something of science fiction. It's now become very much sort of business fact. What do you see the future of artificial intelligence within Kantar in terms of understanding data? And how do you best mix artificial intelligence, AI, with HI, human intelligence?
Well, just over the weekend, funnily enough, other than watching Arsenal win at Wembley, the two things that I was focusing most on was Gary Kasparov was around doing a series of interviews about the anniversary of him losing to the IBM supercomputer for the first time, and DeepMind that were acquired by Google have just beaten the world champion Go player in China. Now, those are incredible advancements, and I'm not sure that any of us really know where AI is going to go within 10 years. Its ability to do things is astounding and is moving at a very fast pace. I think if you look at the work that we do, when there's more and more data, yes, a supercomputer and an AI computer can help. But actually, it's really important to start with some hypotheses. And I think one of the things that has changed has been, as more and more data becomes available, actually you do need a view of how the world is working, and you do need a view of what's driving people's behavior and some of the motivations to enable some of the tools that you've got, AI or otherwise, to actually do their best. So I do still think that there are lots and lots of areas, and that our business for the foreseeable future will be that combination of much heavier analytics, but also much heavier understanding and storytelling and hypothesis building as to what's actually needed.
Now, this is the first year of your Kantar First strategy. What have been the benefits so far to clients and also WPP colleagues around the world, and how do you see that panning out over the next year?
Well, a number of us, Martin and Tam and Iggy, and a number of us were at a top-to-top meeting with the Danone management in Paris last week, and they spontaneously said, for the first time, we feel like we're getting the best of Kantar, and that when I ask a question about a particular issue, I don't need to worry who I'm asking that question of. I know that I'm going to get people working together seamlessly to actually address that question, which is obviously a fantastic thing to hear, and it delivers huge value to a client like Danone. Now, we're not there yet. I mean, I don't believe that we're delivering that kind of level seamlessly, consistently across all of our clients in every part of the world. So we've still got a way to go, but I think we've now got lots and lots of examples of whether it's an existing client or a new business pitch, and we've just had the same example in terms of winning all of Shell's work around the world. Whether it's an existing client or a new business pitch, we've now got examples of where people coming together add value and deliver impact to a client in the way that no one else can, and that we certainly weren't doing consistently before. So I think the evidence is there. We just need to keep on changing our behaviours. We need to keep on practicing. We need to make it an instinct as opposed to something which is special. But we're getting there. I think from a WPP colleague point of view, I hope that we've become easier to work with, that it's less random as to who you speak to, as to what solution you get. You can speak to anyone, and we should be able to navigate what is still quite a complex company for our other WPP colleagues and make it easier for you.
So what advice do you give to WPP colleagues watching this to tap into the new Kantar?
Find the person that you get on well with the best. Find someone who really understands your business, and use them as a kind of human portal into the rest of Kantar.
And finally, Eric, 2 days' time, it's the election in the United Kingdom. I know you're a very keen follower of politics. It's been seen a very sort of a lacklustre, boring campaign. So finally, Eric, is watching the UK elections more or less exciting than watching Arsenal play?
Well, Arsenal is by far and away more frustrating, and obviously much more important.
Well, Eric Salama, Chairman and Chief Executive of Kantar, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, David.
Well, I'm now joined by Mike Smollen, who is the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer for Smollens. Mike, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We just heard Eric Salama talk about actually how much money, in a sense, and thought is moving into the retail environment in one form or another. That's the sweet spot of Smollens, your business.
Yes.
From where you sit at the moment, how do you view the opportunities for brands to build their brand value in the retail environment?
So I think it's correct. I think what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of tightening around different areas of marketing, and I think one of the the sort of last places that you turn to squeeze is your people in store and your people on the ground, your sort of sales force and your execution force and your promoter force. So while we may not see too much growth in the area, we're certainly seeing a resilience towards these cuts. I think if we sort of say where is there place to build value, it depends where we define the store, but if we sort of say that it's the ecosystem around physical retail as a start, there are a couple of areas. The one is kind of consistency, so consistency of messaging to the consumer, consistency of availability and of presence. I think that we often overlook the consistency of a brand's presence to a consumer and that consumer's ability to purchase that brand, and the communication from sort of the brand to that person. Now, while we've seen in modern retail many different ways for the brand to approach the consumer, whether it's social media, whether it's a person in store, whether it's an activation, that interaction is becoming much more important. So the sort of B2C interaction and at the point of purchase, I think, is the best place for a brand to focus in building its value, perhaps its total value, but certainly its in-store value.
Now, you operate in highly developed markets in terms of retail and sort of young markets like Myanmar on the other extreme in terms of retail development. What common themes are there across any of those?
I think, obviously the use of digital, I think e-commerce is of course a common theme, and sort of the move of traditional bricks and mortar retailer categories to e-commerce spaces or e-retailer spaces. So that's certainly a trend, and I think that a lot of markets are almost skipping iterations of physical retail, which we've seen in various technologies, landline, laptop, computer, that sort of thing. I think that the use of digital and the messaging to consumers we're seeing as an easily replicated sort of system, for lack of a better explanation. I think that the way that very developed markets are targeting consumers can be replicated wherever, because almost the route to consumer is becoming homogenous globally. Once we get to a full, and I don't think we'll ever get there, but once we sort of get to a bulky e-retail world, if you think about it, the kind of messaging will be easy to work across different markets. Having said that, I think that we still see a very similar evolution across markets. So, where we're seeing it faster, so places like China, the movement from general trade to modern trade to e-retail is happening much faster. In certain markets, it's happening at the same speed. If you think about sort of some of the Southeast Asian countries, if you think about the African countries, because the distribution capability is very different to what it is in a developed world, we kind of have to go through the hurdles of the normal evolution to get to developed markets. I also think that the investment from brands has been strangled very recently. I mean, we've seen what's happening sort of in the world and what's happening to brands. And so the creation of localized innovation in some of these markets is being put on hold because the bigger markets need to be serviced to keep the volume in those markets. So you really don't get going forward this fantastic investment into innovation of brand and retail that you would ordinarily sort of 5 or 6 years ago.
I mean, digital is clearly having a transformative effect in terms of communication in consumers' lives. We haven't yet seen massive digital in-store. Do you think that's about to change?
I think that there'll be a sort of convergence and then a merge. I think that what we've seen is digital approach the consumer outside of the store, whether that be through social media, through an app, through whatever is driving people to a certain place or driving them to a retailer. I think once they get to a store, what we're seeing is the kind of access points are being created. So whether that's digital couponing, whether it's image recognition, whatever is sort of combining those two areas is the entry point. I hope that we get to a point where, augmented reality or a retailer builds an in-store experience around digital, but in a physical environment. So they piggyback off the physical infrastructure, but add a sort of digital layer to make that experience a bit better. But so far, we really haven't seen anything that is in that, creating in-store theater pushing people to physical bricks and mortar. We've almost seen it as a challenge between e-retail and physical, which I think is incorrect. I mean, certainly from a brand's perspective.
Well, Mike Smollen, the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer for Smollens, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here as always.
Seven years ago, we did our very first country ranking, and that was China. Since then, we have done India, Indonesia, Latin America, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. And that's done on an annual basis. 2017 brings the country rankings to another dimension. Another 6 individual countries will be included in 2017. Spain, Italy, France, Germany, UK, and the USA. Stay tuned and keep watching the Brandsy website for an announcement of when each of those individual rankings will be launched. And make sure that you have installed on your mobile device the Brandsy app, because the moment that the rankings are released, that data will magically appear on your app. Keep watching. Well, I can't believe we've come to the end of this live web broadcast for the launch of the Brandsy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017. This is the report. It's jam-packed with analysis, insights, not just from the Brandsy team, but from brand experts right across WPP companies across the world. You can download this immediately from www.brandsy.com, and all the assets, the videos, the interviews, and a host of other things are also available for you on a special asset download site, and the URL is on the screen. So take a quick picture of that with your phone and download all the material to use yourselves together with your teams, and obviously share it with all of your clients. All that remains for me to say is to say thank you very much indeed for watching and listening to this broadcast. From WPP, myself, David Roth, thank you very much indeed to all of our guests and participants who've taken part in today's broadcast, and a massive, massive congratulations to every single one of the brands that are in the Brandsy Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2017.